Okie dokie, I'm back. As you can see, I'm wearing the same thing as before, so for me, it's just a few minutes since I finished up that first fisheries module. All right, now we're going to talk a little bit about how one tries to recover from that open access situation not being appropriate, and it usually takes quite a while from when it starts being inappropriate before something's done about it, and so many of the world's fisheries are severely drawn down, overfished, because they still haven't managed to do something to lower the amount of fishing effort and thus have a larger fish stock and lower fishing costs. For some ocean fisheries, and we're talking the extent of the fishery is pretty vast, those fish get around. So if we're going to have some sort of a sustainable management situation, we need something like a Law of the Sea Treaty. You may have heard of that. You can Google it. Basically, what it is, it's a bunch of countries getting together to try to agree on something to, in this case, reduce this. One of the things that the treaty does. It doesn't just address fishing. But one of the things that it tries to do is to get the amount of fishing effort to be reduced in a lot of fisheries. All right, so that sounds great. But okay, so you get all these folks together and they declare, wow, it's overfished. What are we going to do about it? The economists are telling us that we should have individual fishing quotas or individual transferable quotas. Those are the same thing. That IFQ, ITQs. You see the different pieces of alphabet soup. It means the same thing. Now, if you see CDQ, we'll get back to that later. That's saying it's still a common property resource, but now it's going to be constrained in terms of the fishing effort by the fishers themselves. We're going to let them be a cartel. All right, I don't want to jump ahead but too far. So. In fact, I did some work for the Environmental Defense Fund a few years ago, and they had a contract through the fish in the Texas Department of Wildlife and Fish or whatever. Anyway, the shrimp fishery, and so what I recommended there was a CDQ. Now, an IFQ or ITQ is more efficient, but I put my political hat on a little bit and said, look, Texas legislators not likely to take this on and divvy up the fishing rights among actual fishers. Okay, well, task the Fish and Wildlife Service to do that. Okay, what I figured they might do, okay, would be to assign a total to the Fisher Association. Okay, and then the fishers themselves would divvy up the fishing rights among themselves. All right, so CDQ probably not quite as efficient as IFQ, ITQ, but maybe more politically feasible. See, those are the kinds of judgments that have to be made by economists and others. Efficiency is important, and that's not the only thing that's important. That's been proven over and over again. Should those other things be important? Intelligent people can disagree. They have price tags hanging on them. Maybe they shouldn't be as important given how much it costs to pursue those other goals. But again, intelligent people can disagree on, just like for going shopping, whether something with a certain price tag is worth buying or whether it's worth leaving on the shelf, not buying. Okay, so the open access situation always creates inertia, whether it's for groundwater or migratory wildlife, whatever. And so, as I said, it takes a while for it to generate, if ever, action. So let's say countries get together in a Law of the Sea type of an arrangement. And just like my skepticism about the Texas legislatures creating IFQs or ITQs for that project was shrimp fishing, the multi-country entity may struggle. They may encounter some resistance quantifying the amount of fish that any given fishing entity can legally capture. So what they typically do first is what we economists call inefficient, sometimes they're downright wacky, restrictions on some way to get the fishing effort to be lowered. For example, they may reduce the fishing season, and which, by the way, is in many cases that can be efficient to do that, to not allow fishing all part of the year. For example, maybe not allow fishing during the breeding season. Okay, but it's gone to the point of wacky, absurd in some cases, because you see what happens is when you shorten the fishing season, given that you haven't changed the common property resource nature, the open access nature of the resource, the fishers get bigger boats and larger nets and smarter crews, I guess, And so they capture just about as many fish in the shorter fishing season, maybe after they made the investments in the bigger, faster boats, maybe more fish. So the authorities roll their eyes and say, well, 100-day fishing season, that was too long. Let's make it 70 days, and let's make it 50 days, and let's make it 30 days. And this may seem incredible to you. I'm still amazed by it. There's some fishing seasons that are 1 day long. Now, you may or may not have seen the movie. I think it was Tom Cruise movie. I can't remember the title of it, but it was about the Oklahoma Sooner Rush, the race to settle Oklahoma. And it was like all these wagons lined up at a starting point, and the person in charge had his pistol up in the air, and bang, and everybody go out there and stake their thing in the ground to claim their little piece of land out there in Oklahoma. Well, that's a good analogy to what goes on in some of these very short season fisheries. Is the boats, first day of that short season comes up, boom, they're out as soon as I guess they can see where they're going. I don't even know if I don't know enough about fishing to know if they need daylight, maybe not, maybe in darkness, but maybe they try to get out of the harbor at least while it's still dark to get to where they're going to do their fishing. So this is where that crash derby notion comes in. That's why I call it kind of wacky, and I'm smiling and laughing. But if you're out there in those circumstances, then the weather turns bad on top of the inherent risk of a bunch of boats trying to get out of the harbor, get out to fish at the same time. It's not funny. I mean, some bad things can happen. If you're out in Alaska fishing and your boat gets dinged by another boat, you could be dead easily before anybody can come get you. The water's cold enough. You go in the drink. If you aren't plucked out of it pretty fast, you're going to be a popsicle. So anyway, so that's one of the wacky things that's done in an effort to not assign IFQ/ITQ, but still have some attempt at an impact on the fishing effort. Other things that may be seen as even more wacky, gear restrictions. Now, fishers have shown themselves to be very ingenious. So when you take certain fishing methods off the legal to-do list, they find ways to substitute other methods. So once again, it achieves relatively little gain in reduced fishing effort. And it works because it increases cost, but it dissipates away resources in terms of, waste. Having to pay more for something than it otherwise would cost. It'd be far better to capture that additional cost in the form of a fee, which the revenue from which could then be used to benefit the fishery, to rebuild it, to do other things. That project that I worked on with EDF, they have a fee that, remember what, I don't think it's collected on the number of fish caught. Maybe it is, I don't remember. But what they used the money for was to buy fishing vessels or buy fishing vessel licenses. I'm not sure that it's been a few years. I don't think they actually bought the boats, but the boats have to be certified to be fishing boats, so they purchased these certifications. Well, it hasn't, it's a gear restriction. Predictably, it hasn't helped much because the fewer remaining boats just caught more shrimp. Now, what could be done by that vessel buyback or certification buyback program would be to reduce the heterogeneity of the fishery. Okay, that's kind of a complicated concept. My one publication in Fisheries talks about this. And basically it says that if you try to put in an ITQ, IFQ, even CDQ system, community development quota, CDQ, it's tougher to do that the more the fishers differ in what they fish, how they fish. It's tougher to do that the more different the fishers are. All right? So what we could do with the vessel buyback money to get certain boats out of the business, in this case it was shrimp fishing, we could buy the ones that are the most different from the rest, so that the remaining ones would be a much more homogeneous group, and that increases the probability that you can gain agreement among them in a divvying up of the IFQ, ITQ total quantity of allowable catch. All right, quick sipperoo. Okay, looking at my script here. Okay, so there's an initial effort. There's an initial effort to reduce fishing effort through these restrictions, through regulation. Ultimately, that typically proves to be at most a delaying tactic. And if they don't reduce the heterogeneity of the fishers, the remaining ones, they may not have done more than bought a little bit of time or reduced fishing effort a little bit. Okay, so what are we going to do? Well, maybe finally do ITQ, IFQ, or CDQ. Actually quantify the total fishing quantity and have either the fishers allocated among themselves or have the government privatize a certain share of the allowable catch. Typically, it's not a quantity of fish that's assigned to a certain fisher. It's a percentage of the allowable catch. And at the beginning of the fishing season, if there is one, at some point before the fishers typically are out there in numbers, there'll be a declaration by the authorities what the allowable catch is. Okay, so one more graph. Now beware, this graph is not an economic model type graph, right? There's a difference. Because you see over there on the x-axis, we have time, okay? So we're tracing out the price trend in a fishery between when it's discovered, okay, right over here. Okay, and that's where it starts. And so what happens then is sometimes it's just accidental that it's discovered, but sometimes it's because the price was high for that fish somewhere else. A new fishery, the same thing, is discovered. And so the fishers get in there and they get after it, and the large amount of fishing that they land at first drives down the price. Okay, and so the price hits a minimum at TQ max, right, when the maximum amount is caught at that time, T. Okay, that's where the price hits rock bottom. And then at that point, because the fishing effort continues to increase, the amount caught starts to decline. We're assuming constant demand, by the way, here. That would add a bunch of noise to it of shifting around based on demand. We don't need that. So again, just assuming constant demand. That's not the same thing as constant price. Okay, constant demand. Now, when the fishing effort is starting to be constrained by how hard it is to catch fish, the price is going to start rising. Okay, and somewhere in that increase, probably at the initial part of it, somewhere in this beginning part of it before my next dotted line, they may try those shortened fishing seasons and the gear restrictions. Maybe that doesn't occur till T prime, but at some point on this price increase trend, if it ever does happen, again, it may never happen. Many fisheries have stayed unallocated and therefore overfished for, well, ever since the demand was large enough for it to be overfished. But if it ever does happen, it happens during this phase here of price increase. And so what happens there? Well, why does the price continue to increase? Well, because at that point, the authorities recognize that the fishery is overfished, and often they declare what's called a fishing moratorium, okay, which doesn't always mean zero fishing, but it can mean at least drastically reduced fishing over what will be sustainable long term. And so, fewer fish available, yeah, the price is going to go higher. And then at some point, the fish stock is rebuilt to what the authorities think is an amount that sustains a much higher level of fishing effort. And so then the price starts to decline, okay, as fishing resumes, and then it with constant demand it plateaus out at P sub E once the authorities achieve the get back to my other graph here. This Q star total amount of fishing effort actually, which will yield a certain amount of fish. All right, let's see, where am I here? I'm kind of bouncing around because it's easier to talk extemporaneously than to read my script here. Okay, so we just looked at the price trend graph, which, by the way, you'll find on slide 7 of your PowerPoint. And by the way, that may change because for some reason, as I was rereading the fishery chapter today, I didn't get into this at all in the PowerPoint. Kind of weird why I didn't do that. I'm not sure what I was thinking at the time. I've had that PowerPoint for a while. I may add a slide or two at the beginning, but for now, and anyway, it's there. It just may not stay on slide 7. You'll find a prettier version of this, prettier than my Sharpie version. Okay. So let me go over that again. Discovery, kind of like the gold rush thing, running in there. Wow, lots of fish to be caught. Price is high. Okay, so lots of fish are caught. Price goes down, and the fishery is overfished, and so the price starts to go up because the sustainable amount to be caught is quite low. It takes high fishing effort to get there, and then, so the price starts to increase as the fishery is continued to be put under some duress. At some point, some things are done, maybe only the fishing season and the gear restrictions, if that, and maybe at that point IFQ or ITQ or CDQ. And at that point, the price continues to rise. In some cases, if the fishery is so badly overfished that there needs to be a moratorium or recovery period, and then the price then can go down to its sustainable level once the stock recovery has occurred. Okay, so let me pull this graph out again. Okay, so AB would be if the public declares its property right and rents out the right to fish, right? You have to pay a fishing fee. And Q1 star, right there, is the amount that can be allocated if we use the IFQ or ITQ or CDQ system. Okay, so comparison of these different regimes. Just like when we were talking about emission allowances and emission fees, same deal. It's hard to find estimation. Our graph assumes, right? This graph assumes that we can estimate MSC and MPC. It's not a straightforward, easy task. A lot of us economists make a good living torturing data and trying to find out what that is. And of course, it's constantly changing too. So it may be smarter from that perspective than to use a IFQ, ITQ system, let the market set the price for transfers of those fishing rights. The authorities claim their property rights and rent out the right to fish with a fishing fee. It may take frequent adjustments to that fee to keep the fishing not caught at an efficient level. And as we talked about back when it was an emissions fee, it's quite disruptive to constantly be changing that number. All right, so that's just sort of some comparison of that. And let's see. Gone over some of this already. Okay, we talked about the Texas vessel buyback program. Again, there wasn't a whole lot of impact on the total catch. What it could be repurposed for is to reduce fisher heterogeneity and thus increase the probability of moving past these vessel buyback, gear restriction, shorter season kind of attempts to reduce fishing effort. Now, if we do go to the CDQ, which I recommended in that case, just based on likely more politically feasible to do that, what we've in effect done is created a cartel. Right? We've basically said one entity is going to control and allocate a fixed quantity of fish so as to realize this very significant profit, TB minus TC. You can think of TB as TR. Okay, so some people say that there should be some sort of a tax now to address the monopoly profit issue. But beware, if you address that concern with a tax, it should be a lump sum tax, maybe based on the size of somebody's boat, but not based on the amount of fish that they catch, because otherwise that would further reduce the amount of fish caught. Tax may be warranted to tax away some of those monopoly profits from a CDQ situation, maybe even from an ITQ, IFQ situation, because even then, if Q star is the resulting amount of fishing effort, the individual fishers are going to divvy up based on their share of the allowable catch, a pretty hefty chunk of money. It's going to be looking pretty good to be in the fishing business. Okay, so I went over some of that already. Yeah, the final thing to discuss here in these videos, and we'll get after some of this in class because I know that these issues with all the different graphs, although you can freeze frame it and look at it and study it, probably still takes some what we Cajuns call interactional to nail down, and that's what we'll do. Now, one thing that comes along sometimes in this time period, when the fishing price is increasing, okay, that is somewhat helpful in reducing fishing effort, is aquaculture. Okay, so maybe the aquaculture fish farming is enough to keep the price low enough to suppress the fishing effort, maybe. So that may be helpful. Now, not all fish can be grown on the farm, but some can. So sometimes that's helpful. Alrighty.